Hi, Paul Thomson here from Spitfire Audio. I hope everyone's having a wonderful holiday season and that you're rested and enjoying yourselves. And I just wanted to have a look back at 2025. I've got a piece of music as well, which I'm going to play you, and I'm going to show you a few tips that I've used for that. But first of all, I just want to reflect on 2025, both the music for film world in its entirety, but also our little corner of it and what we've released this year, which is just extraordinary, an amazing amount of work from the team. We've had two massive updates for SSO recorded in London in the beautiful Air Studios. We released the Mervyn Warren Choir recorded in Los Angeles, a choir of the most insanely talented singers you can imagine. Absolutely incredible choir. We recorded in France, we recorded the Château Piano, which was used by rock royalty legends through the 70s and 80s. We recorded the Ronrocco, the master himself, Gustavo Santaolalla, playing his Ronroco's legendary instrument in his own studio. We recorded with the Newton brothers for Tenebra, some of the most masterful horror scoring sounds ever assembled. And also among the other products that we released the BBC's Radiophonic Workshop library, a mixture of some of the incredible archive created from the 50s through to the 70s by these geniuses who are creating the sound of electronic music and really blazing a trail for many dance producers today, really very influential. But also we got the surviving members of the workshop back in the studio for a week in Maida Vale Studio 3 to record again in the same kind of style, but a whole wealth of new material. It's an absolute treasure trove of cool stuff. So that's a few highlights from our year. But what about the film music world this year? Well, there are four people that I want to mention in my little roundup. I think I'm focusing on quite a small part of the year, but I think that these four people, three of whom I'm lucky enough to be able to call friends, are just such extraordinary musicians that I'm always awed when I hear what they've done. The first three worked on a project, and of course I'm talking about Wicked for Good. I think the two Wicked films are the greatest contribution to filmed musicals of all time. I just think they're so spectacular from everything about the films themselves, but in particular in the music side of things. Of course, the original score, Stephen Schwartz, and of course the people who worked on the Broadway orchestrations, which are pretty solidly made their way through to the film with a number of small changes. Amazing orchestrations as well, arrangements, and quite spectacular work. But the compositions are just incredible. And the second of the four people is John Powell. John Powell worked on the score with Stephen Schwartz. So he created all of the music outside of the songs. He connected parts of the songs together as well. Wrote all the stuff that you needed for the kind of greater exposition that you can get in film compared to the theatre. The third person, who I just think is one of the most amazing musicians I know, is of course Greg Wells. Greg Wells is an incredible record producer. He can play pretty much anything you put in front of him to an insane level. I mean, Stephen said to him, when he was talking about who he was going to hire to play, because Greg produced all of the songs for both of these musicals, and he's got a bit of a history in film musicals now, from Greatest Showman onwards. But he produced these songs, and then Stephen said to him, no, I want you to play everything on them. So literally, apart from one or two synth parts and the orchestra, Greg is playing everything on these productions of these songs. And you just listen to it, and not only is the production incredible with all the beautiful, delicate detail and, amazing creative, stuff around the edges that makes the best record production endlessly listenable. But the musicianship of his playing, the drum parts are just insane. The guitar is incredible. The keyboard playing is incredible. The piano, the bass, it's all amazing. And these films represent years of work and an unbelievable dedication, day in, day out, working insane hours. It's just an extraordinary achievement. And the fourth person is the incredible musician, Simon Franklin. Not only has he worked with almost everyone you can think of, from Madonna to Michael Jackson to Quincy Jones to Whitney Houston to Celine Dion, Toni Braxton, The Cause, the Bee Gees, Pavarotti. I mean, it's just like there was a point in the 90s where he worked on something like 25 of the top 100 records in the US top 100. I mean, he's such an incredible musician. But not only that, not only has he got this incredible history in the record industry, as this kind of, producer, arranger, musician, spanning across all these different styles, but he's also an incredible composer of orchestral score music, as the composer of the Avatar movies. And the latest one, again, is one of these extraordinary globe-spanning achievements that has ended in nearly 2,000 pages of score. I think of the movie, there's about 3 hours of music in the movie. I think there's only 10 minutes, he said, in the movie, pretty much, which isn't scored. And he's been working on it for about 7 years, and really intensely over the last 2 years in different studios all over the world. So again, it's this kind of incredible dedication to producing a piece of art that will stand the test of time. And the score is just, it covers so many different styles, but it's always got that kind of a signature of Simon's sound. And I feel like there's bits and pieces of, the kind of British tradition, but he's brought in lots of other influences from all over the world. There are parts that almost sound like, a piece of Vaughan Williams. And then there's parts that are, have this incredible kind of growling synth work in. And it's just brilliant. It's a wonderful score. So if you were going to listen to only 2 film scores over the holiday period, I would listen to the soundtrack from Wicked 2. I would listen to the song album and the score album, because they're both incredible. And I would listen to the soundtrack from Avatar 3. It's just absolutely wonderful. And if you've seen the movie, you'll know how well it fits to the movie as well. Now, what about the music? So I've written a piece of music, and I've kind of lent into our 2025. I lay my template out like a score page. So it's got the woodwinds at the top, then it's got the horns, and then the rest of the brass section. It's got the percussion underneath that, and you can see that I'm using, again, there's lots of SSO stuff in here. I've used the solo strings and the Motif Brass, so both of the big updates that came out free this year. And then in the strings section, I start with the soloists there, and then we've got all of the rest of the strings. And you can see that I'm leaning very, very heavily on Andy Blaney's performance patches, scripted by Blake Robinson. They're just fabulous, so easy to use, and I've got everything from kind of super fast runs in there to really beautiful romantic kind of playing. So you'll hear that. And then what have I got in? Symphonic Extras, another one of our little releases which gathered up some of the other stuff recorded in Air Lyndhurst. I've got the Château Piano. I've got a couple of really lovely patches from Radiophonic Workshop, and I've got Tenebra in there as well. I've got the Ronrocco, and I've got the Mervyn Warren Choir as well, especially a little bit at the beginning, but especially coming in towards the end to really kind of lift the emotional weight at the end there. So let me start by playing down the whole piece. Right, let's have a look at a couple of these parts on their own. So first up, I've used the Motif Brass for these kind of lovely, punchy, really kind of strident, melodic lines like this one here. And I've front-loaded that sound. If you listen to the same kind of element that we've got in the horns here, where I'm not leaning very heavily into the legato, although I do a little bit more towards the end. These patches are still by far the best ones to pick because they detect, they crossfade in a really clever way. So as you hold the note down, you get a slightly different articulation that plays. So for the very shortest ones, you're getting that lovely staccatissimo, and then as you hold them down longer, you get the tenuto, and then the, more of a kind of marcato sound, or, they just react incredibly well to your playing. It makes everything a lot easier. So first of all, you can see how these three interlock. Actually, if I just highlight only the firsts, and then only the seconds, and then only the violas, you can see that they really interlock in a fantastic way. Now I'm using the way that the performance patch introduces the run. I'm using a middle velocity for the following notes. So just the hard velocity for the start note. So you get a nice firm start to the run. And then the following notes are all legatos, they're all overlapping. And because they're happening so fast, it triggers the fast run transition, which means that they sound so brilliant. They sound great. And then I'm using them to just kind of keep the energy going and have this kind of fantastic flourishes as the brass are punching out the tune. So let's have a listen to those on their own. Okay, so you get the idea. They are accentuating all of that stuff. So if I play the whole track from there. If we look at the harp in this section as well. So you can see that it's not perfect. I've played it in, and when I get something that sounds wrong, or I want to very deliberately change the velocity, because sometimes when you're playing fast, it's harder to control the velocity, then I'll go in and edit it. But what I've tried to do here is I've tried to not, overly quantize everything, and I've just tried to play it in and make it feel as natural as possible. And if there are little mistakes here and there, it kind of helps to create the kind of overall effect of a fast-moving, slightly rough around the edges, exciting kind of vibe. Now, something else that I've really been kind of looking at scores, and I would really recommend that you look at some scores. If you don't know how to read music, I would strongly recommend you learn how to read music. It's actually not that hard. And it opens up a whole world of stuff that you can learn about the way that, for hundreds of years, pieces of music in this kind of style have been written. So you can unlock some of that information and use it in your own music. One of the things that I've been concentrating on is the orchestration of my percussion sections. So if I just widen this out a little bit so you can see more stuff, just check out the percussion on their own. I've left out the harp. Actually, and the vibes. Now, what do you take from that? What I've started trying to do is rather than just kind of sticking stuff in like, I'll put a bass drum at the beginning of every other bar or whatever, I've started trying to think about events. So if I want part of a flourish or I want part of an extravagant gesture, I'll try and orchestrate so as much of the orchestra, including the percussion section, is contributing to that moment as possible. And it really makes a big difference. And even things like this. So Also, the other thing that you'll see is that none of it is quantized. So I'm not quantizing this stuff because it sounds better. And yes, it gets hard. Sometimes you have to kind of play slightly ahead of the beat to get the sounds to sound at the right moment, in the same way that anybody who plays a real instrument often has to play slightly ahead of the beat, especially with instruments that take, a few milliseconds to actually start vibrating or to sound. It's a really important part of a musician's toolkit to be able to do that. It's something you should practice. Orchestration wise, I'm using a couple of different things. So I'm using the crotales, these little tuned bells. They are, or disc bells rather. They're very, very piercing. So I use them quite sparingly. The Glock and the Celeste, you know what those are. The Celeste is obviously great for those kind of, it's a little bit more pianistic. I'm trying not to use it too much like that. So if you look at my Celeste track, you'll see that I'm doing, there's one section here where I'm using it in a kind of, but a lot of the rest of the time, so it's just playing like a run or a single part or a melody, or here there's a section, where it's in sixth, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So sparing. I'm not using it like a piano, in other words. The tubular bells, again, they have a kind of an interesting sound. It sounds a bit ropey if you start trying to play fast stuff on them. But also they have very odd harmonics. So you'll notice there's super strong harmonics, and these are not the same across the entire run of bells. So you might have a part where the note that you want to play sounds kind of weird, and that's because one of the very strong harmonics is not in tune with the rest of your orchestra. So that's just something to bear in mind. And then of the other tuned stuff, there's literally just one little tiny moment for the xylophone there. And then at the end here, I've got this little orchestration between these three instruments, the crotales, the Glock and the Celeste. So I'll just play that for you. It's very, very simple, but interleaving those with these single parts. So if I just show you, you've got those sixths there, you've got a single line on the Glock and then a single note on the crotales, just for the beginning of each phrase. And you can hear as well, they have quite a complex harmonic structure, those sounds as well. So that's the percussion section. And if we look at my entire orchestration of the Woodwinds, it's kind of the flourishes at the beginning to get those kind of really lovely, jagged kind of stab runs at the beginning. Let's solo this stuff so you can hear it. Then we've got a bit of melody. And then everything else is just kind of filling in to these kind of moments where you have the chords. They're very, very beautiful instruments to kind of bring into those kind of moments. And then that's it pretty much for the end. The brass, again, they're kind of moving for the most part as one. They're occupying a character within the overall composition. So if we listen from here. Actually, that very first note, things like that are really important. If I just turn the solo off again, just listen to that first chord. So it's not something that you can necessarily immediately hear when you hear that first chord, the opening chord, but it's a really important character part of the sound. It fills out and makes all of this kind of stuff. It makes your piece sound more interesting when you think about how to split these parts up. Let's go back into the... So again, you're looking at the brass. I'm leaning into that kind of almost traditional sort of harmonic series writing. I mean, I know it's not really the harmonic series because we've got the valves and so on. I'm happily using whatever notes I fancy, but I'm thinking about it as like, you know, larger leaps going up to smaller intervals, you know, that kind of thing, because that sounds so much more characteristic. And when you use the instruments and use them in a very characteristic style, if you are trying to perform in the same way that that player might be performing, then what you end up with is so much better. It's so much more musical sounding. It really makes a huge difference. Timpanis, you know, so sometimes I've used a couple of timpani rolls at the end where they are actual timpani rolls. And so just to get that up, I mean, that's the SSO timpani patch. And you can see you've got these different styles, different kind of performances. And the rolls are really useful. But sometimes you don't want to use the rolls when you want a roll. And the reason for that is that when you want this sound, then that's brilliant, you know, and you only get that with a recorded roll. But sometimes you don't want that. You want something that is a lot looser, that you can kind of control a bit more. And that's when you're using it in this kind of flourish. And you'll see that we've got these, I've got my timpani laid out with the two-handed mapping. So I can play the same notes in two different positions on the keyboard. And it means that for things like this, if I just zoom in, you know, you get a much more real kind of thing, even when you're going the other way. Like you can see here, the dynamic is going down. So I'll just play that again. And you almost can't hear it, but it's a thing that you would write in a part and you would get the player to play, and it makes a big difference. And here again, I might do something where I want it to sound looser. So, you know, it's that kind of thing where you've got a bit more control over the phrasing of it, I guess you might say, as a you know, how a real timpanist might play. And of course, it's the same with stuff like the snare drums. You play that stuff in, it's much better. My two Ronrocos have this lovely part here, this harmonic part. I'll just play that in context. And in order to sit those into my orchestra, I've simply popped them left and right in the hall. So I've got if I look at the mixer page, then you can see I'm using, you know, a pretty heavy mix here, sort of 71% from the hall. So I've got a little bit of the close mic in effectively, but it's pretty much the sound of the players sitting either side of the tree. And that works really well. Now you'll notice that while I've got a few other reverbs up, I've got the Lexicon Random Hall on a couple of these solar patches on the BBC and the Tenebra patches, just to give them a bit of a kind of beautiful lush space. Actually, let me show you what those are doing, because they're just character sounds, and that's what these libraries are really good at. They're really great for creating these musical ambiences. Check this out. And so they give you a really lovely sound, you know, that gives you something else that you can't really create with just the orchestral instruments on their own. Now, I've got the choir going through a cinematic rooms reverb, and that's because I wanted to give it a little bit of gloss. Let's have a listen to the choir on their own there at the end. And that's just mirroring the solo violin at the end there. Really lovely, and I've separated them because I want them to sound, I didn't want the connection between the notes, I want them to sound like two separate notes on their own. That's just a kind of glossy choir sound at the end to get that through the cinematic. But apart from that, you'll see that all of my reverb sends here are 0. I'm not using any reverb. So everything that you can hear coming from the orchestra, if I go across the whole thing, everything you can hear is just using the natural sound of SSO in the room. So let's, I'm going to try and highlight the entire thing. I don't know what that's going to look like. Let's find out. Here. And then let me pull that up a bit. And we'll get that roughly centered, so that you can see pretty much everything. Because my computer's got so many programs running, it's struggling a little bit to keep redrawing. So I'm not going to keep trying to switch between one track and another. I'm just going to play the whole thing down, and you can see and listen and watch how the instruments interact in the different sections. So that's my little holiday piece. And I guess the last thing just to say is, if you look at my controller lanes there, you can see there's a lot of mod wheel going on. There's a lot of stuff going on. A little bit of expression to control the overall volume, but most of it is the mod wheel. And of course, the vibrato control. And this is the essential thing. You've got to be, you know, I'm using this lovely solid state controller here. I've also got my Choice Source Designs controller, which I love to use as well from time to time. Any kind of controller like these are absolutely fabulous. It gives you hands-on control, and you need to feel as much like you're performing these parts as possible. And then what you end up with will be a much more musical production at the end. Thank you so much for all your support this year in what's been a huge year of change for Spitfire. But there's one thing that remains absolutely constant. And I hope that you can see that as you've followed our journey this year and seen the different things that we've released and put out into the market and updated. We're absolutely committed to bringing you the very best virtual instruments, creative tools that you can use to make your music with. We want these things. It's why we do it. We want the best tools possible. And so we make no compromises when we find a piano we want to record. It's in a chateau that is being half rebuilt in France. It's not been, you know, it's been there for 110 years. It's been lovingly restored. We go and find it. We find the people. We talk to who we need to talk to. We work out the best way of recording it. We find out the history of these things. When you touch a musical instrument, you're interacting with not only the tradition, not only the years, sometimes hundreds of years that have gone into the development and, you know, creation of that musical instrument, but also with some of these much older instruments, and sometimes in certain places, you're interacting with that whole thing. You're interacting with that particular instrument in that particular acoustic, which gives you a certain feeling and a certain emotion. And these things are inseparable from music. Music is all emotion. It's just the vibration of the air around our ears and our body that creates a feeling inside us. And that's what is so important. That's what we're, everybody at Spitfire is absolutely dedicated to that, finding that feeling, chasing that next, amazing thing that can bring creativity to be used by people all over the world. It's vital that we support our musicians and our studios, and that's something that we do at Spitfire by paying a royalty. And we've paid out, I don't know what the exact figure is at the moment, it's well over £25 million over the years, which is just incredible that money has gone back into the music community. And that has come from you. And for that, huge thanks from us and from all of the musicians that we work with and all of the studios that we work with. I hope that 2026 is a great year for you. We've got a lot of really exciting stuff happening in 26. We're recording a lot of new stuff. We're updating a lot of stuff. It's a big year of work going forward for us. We're going to hit the ground running in January, and it's going to be a wild ride. So we look forward to sharing that with you. Have a fantastic new year and look forward to seeing you on the other side. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.